It was great to have you here. I'm keen that you get something more than just information. People who have worked with us know that what we're trying to do here when we work with clients is to challenge clients on the basics and to get them and get you to rethink sometimes some of the beliefs that you have about, well, in this case, what it is to be assertive. And I particularly named this webinar Assertiveness is Not for Wimps because I think the whole assertiveness movement probably started around the 50s with Dale Carnegie, 50s and 60s, training people, particularly salespeople, to speak up for themselves, to make something of themselves. But I think that's been overplayed. And so what I want to try, one of the things I want to show this morning is that assertiveness is for people who are serious about communicating, who really need to get their messages across. It doesn't necessarily mean that they start from a point of shyness or particularly from aggression or anywhere. It's just assertive talk or assertive behavior for me is a way of expressing ourselves in a way that actually has the impact that we particularly want. Now, the second thing I want to say is that the format of today obviously is all me talking at you. You don't get a word in until right at the end. So that's obviously not typical for the way we work, but it's a limitation of the medium. But I hope that whilst I'm talking, you're exploring and I'm asking you some questions that help you to explore some of the things that you believe and feel. So my aim is to promote simplicity and to get you to experiment, to play around with something that you haven't done before and to try something new and multiple times. Okay, so we're going to start off with a poll. This is about how do you currently handle big thoughts and feelings? Do you act? You just say how you feel? Do you show people? In other words, you let people take notice of what you're doing and think for themselves? Or do you hint at them? Or do you tend to kind of fester and try and shut it in? And then maybe, rather than offending anybody, or do you just duck out and try and keep your head down? Okay, I think that's everybody who's going to, 97% of you voted. Wow. Okay, here we go. So, and here are the results. So, I never know how these things are going to turn out, but interesting, I do tend to fester rather than offend or kick off. That's very interesting. There's a lot to be said for that, to be honest. At one point, I just say how I feel. Those two were very much sort of 30% each, but the festerers take the day. People ducking out, in a sense, you're luckier because it means that you're probably not becoming as upset as the rest of us to begin with. So lucky you. So, and a few people hinting, and some people just showing and letting others work it out for themselves. Well, we're going to come back to that. In fact, what I'm hoping is that Nicola will just take a little note of those, and let's see if those results change by the end. And I think that's a really interesting observation there, that a lot of you decide that actually biting your tongue is a strong option. Well, firstly, so let's get on with what this whole topic is about. It's a huge topic, and it's one that's been fairly obsessing me for years now. But let's get down to some definitions. That's always a good place to start, I think. So what is assertiveness, and how does it differ from its sort of stable mates? Well, let's start off. Well, let's start off with assertiveness. Well, assertiveness for me is actually saying how you feel, what's important to you, what you believe in, without needing to squash the other person unnecessarily. Now, I depict this with a lion is because they have the reputation for not killing unless it's absolutely necessary, which is a comfort, of course, unless you're being chased by one and you're not quite sure whether she or he has it in mind that it is necessary that day. But anyway, so this is about using whatever you need to get a message across without squashing the other person. Now, if we go in the other direction, submissiveness is, you can imagine then, allowing people to squash us habitually. Now, sometimes we do all flip in and out of submissiveness. We all have our moments where we're just too tired and we give it over to the other person. We put their feelings first. But the really submissive person, or someone who is habitually submissive, is doing this a lot. And you will recognize in yourself, if this is one of your habits, one of your ways, and I think it's probably deeper than a habit, is that you tend to acquiesce to the other person. You may then end up festering about it. So festerers out there, ask yourself, how often do I do that? Have I become used to giving way all the time? At the other end of the spectrum, we have aggression. Now, this is the definition of this is when I put my feelings, thoughts, and wishes ahead of everybody else's. Many of us have these moments where we just see red. The mist descends. There are lots of euphemisms for it, but where we become unreasonable. For me, just to clear this up, there is no connection between aggression and assertiveness. It's not possible to flip from, well, it is possible to flip from one to the other, but they are distinctly different. When aggression is happening, it's when I have consciously made the decision to ignore how the other person feels and I just carry on charging. So that's what it all means to me, and I'm going to come on to language in a minute. But what about outcomes? What does it actually achieve? And this is really important, because there has to be a win, but there are some really less obvious wins, and that's what I want to highlight to you. It's not just about winning the point. There are far more interesting things that actually happen to us. So I think that one of the most important outcomes is that actually by being assertive, we actually cut through the noise. We make a space in a conversation that people can pay attention to. I'm going to come on to how to do it in a moment. So we don't have to be loud about this. So if you tend to be a quiet person, if you much prefer listening, if you prefer giving other people the lead, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't mean that you can't be assertive. But when you do choose to be, when we choose to be, it means that we cut through all the waffle to be heard. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. The interesting thing about being assertive and what it achieves is that it also makes us think about what we mean. Because we're choosing our words, and not choosing our words carefully, but being selective about using the words that are going to count. So this isn't about diplomacy. This is about using words that work. Again, I'll come on to that in a moment. So it makes us conscious of our behavior, and interestingly, therefore less likely to lapse into either submissiveness or aggression. The other thing that it does is it makes us conscious. It makes us look at ourselves and say, where am I in this conversation? Am I really telling the truth? Am I really saying to people where I am with this? So it makes us conscious, and it makes us think about meaning. So those are three things that not many people think about when they're thinking about whether assertiveness is something that they're going to do. Okay, so now we get on to the really interesting stuff. How do we actually do this? Now there are absolutely shelves full of books about how to be assertive. And for me, it's always been absolutely crystal clear. So what I'm going to do is, rather than tell you, I'm straight off at least, I'm going to give you some examples, and I'm going to put them up on screen. And as I read them out, just think about which bit of this piece of speech is the assertive bit. What makes these things assertive? Okay, I'm going to read them out. Because there are a couple of people who I know are dialing in. I think somebody is charging up some motorway and is on a hands-free. So I'm going to have to, they're not going to see this stuff. I'm pleased that we're not going to delay the decision. I think they would have lost patience with us. So what's the assertive bit of that? Figured that one out? I'm going to come back to that in a second. I'm worried that we're straying away from our brief. It could really cost us in time and effort. I'm frustrated that option B was dismissed so quickly because it didn't seem to get enough airtime to be thought about properly. Okay, so now I want to actually tell you what I think makes these statements effective, what makes them assertive. Well, the most important element for me is that it actually includes a feeling, so that makes it assertive. What also makes it assertive is that it's very specific and it contains a why. Why am I having that feeling about this thing so much? Okay, let's go on to the next example and I'll show you what I mean. See if you can get ahead of me on this one. Okay, you spotted it, the feeling. I'm worried. Straying away from the brief. It could cost us. How I feel, what about, why? Okay, I think you should have this one off pat by now. Frustrated. Option B is dismissed because it didn't get enough airtime. The other thing that really works for me is that it's very brief. When I first got into this kind of material at the end of the 80s, one of the first things that my coaches then taught me, and incidentally, they didn't know they were coaches, they thought they were trainers. It was quite a strange setup. Philip and Rosemary Gould were the people who started me off down this trail, and indeed it introduced me to the whole notion of a career in psychology. But one of the things I learned first from listening to them talking was that they didn't waste words. And it's the bug, it's a kind of obsession that I caught from them. So why does this work so beautifully? Well, I kind of said some of it already. Firstly, it's brief. You only need to use a few words to get a big message across. Those of you who are happy to say just a few things will love that bit, I hope. You don't have to construct a whole complex argument for why you're right or why someone else is wrong. Secondly, simplicity is absolutely key. Again, if you don't enjoy the thought of speaking up in a crowd or in front of a meeting room full of people, or indeed with an individual for whom you have a difficult message, or maybe a piece of praise and you feel uncomfortable about giving positive feedback and praise, the fact that you only have to string a few words together and you can keep it really simple, you can keep it really simple, hopefully should be a comfort to you. And the third strength of talking this way is that it's true. We're actually telling the truth. So what happens is that our bodies, our faces, our gestures all go in the same direction. We run into body language difficulties, and this is partly why I have never been a fan of particularly studying or manipulating body language. In fact, I have a strong allergy for that, is that trying to manipulate our body language doesn't work because our feelings leak out. But if we tell the truth about our feelings and what we're thinking, the message comes across as extremely big because it's true. So that's the how bit. So you will have picked up in the how that it's actually simply about saying three things. Firstly, how I feel. Secondly, what that feeling is about. And thirdly, why I'm having that feeling about that thing. And then at the end of that, and this is the really important bit, I pause. Pausing gives the other person or the world, and even you in your head, time to reflect. Time to reflect on the content of the message and time to reflect on the implications. Okay, so that is the how. By the way, if you don't want to scribble this all down and you'd rather just watch the screen and listen, then there's a cheat sheet coming out next week as well. So if you don't get all this down, don't worry, I'll be putting a cheat sheet out. So that's the how. Okay, now I talked about some sort of hidden benefits, and I've given you a few of them. One of them is that it's actually really cathartic to talk about our feelings. And until relatively recently, we didn't really know why that was. Now, with the introduction of fMRI, which is the functional resonance magnetic imaging, we've been able to tell a huge amount about what goes on in the brain. And indeed, in that vein, what I thought I'd do is give you sort of a Neuro 101 according to my own personal research and the best stuff that's out there. So we're going to take a sort of fairly innocuous example, the typical mouse, the rodent problem that some people seem to have. Now, I love them. Claire, my wife, doesn't like putting the ducks away at night. We have ducks, and there's a shed where we keep the grain, and she can't stand all the little scuttling about that goes on in the evening after dark. But I think the little critters are really cute. Anyway, let's take this as a working example. So I'm going to take you through what actually happens with our feelings when something happens outside and we see it. And this is about the impact of actually talking about our feelings and why it has such a beneficial effect. Has an intellectually beneficial effect. Okay, so why does it work so well? Well, let's look at what happens when somebody typically sees a mouse. So what happens is, you probably know from general knowledge, your amygdala starts firing off. In fact, you have two of them, and they're little almond-shaped critters, stereophonic, right in the center of your brain, and they start to fire off. You know that because there are chemicals coursing around your brain and around your body telling you that you're afraid or angry or are having some other big emotional reaction. It's very, very quick. It's the most primitive part of our brain, and it gets, it hogs everything. Whilst that's happening, very little else can go on. Now, obviously, it doesn't all happen by itself, and I promised you some insights into the neurology, and here they are. Now, obviously, I have gone a bit off track with my own version of neurology, but I think there's quite a lot to be said for going beyond the fMRI studies. And here's how I see it working. Actually, what's going on here is that, you know, it's all part of a fairly complicated wiring system. I think that's over 8. Now, of course, it's ridiculous. It doesn't happen by itself. There has to be somebody in there pulling the levers. That's logical, of course. And what actually happens when the operator sees the mouse on their monitor, they pull the lever instantly to say there's something wrong. But as soon as the human who owns the head actually talks about their feelings, then what happens then is that the operator then flicks the lever onto a different kind of functioning. And this is where the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, I'll say that again, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex really comes into its own. That bit is actually true. Curiously, just the right-hand part of our brain, it's actually not on the surface as I'm showing it here. It's actually right on the inside. There are a collection, or several collections of cells, I mean millions and billions of them, that start to do some work. Now, we don't actually know why or what they're doing. We just know that when they start to work, the amygdala settle down. They stop firing so much. So there's something in there about why we feel better. Because as soon as we say the name of the emotion, a different part of the brain is engaged. Perhaps we're making sense of it. Rather than being subject to it, we're looking at it. We're looking in at ourselves and saying, I am frightened. I am worried. So as an experiment for yourself, try that out. When you're in a jam, maybe this afternoon, maybe literally a traffic jam, or you're angry with something, or you're frightened of something. Maybe you've got a presentation this afternoon or a big meeting and you don't know how it's going to go. Try saying to yourself, try admitting to yourself exactly what you're feeling, and then listen to yourself, sense yourself. Has that feeling in your chest or in the pit of your stomach subsided at all? So that's Neuro 101. I'm sure it doesn't take me to tell you that not all of it was totally accurate, but that's another take on it for you. Okay, so that's the neurology out of the way, most of it of which, as I said, is actually true. But what about the external effects? What does it actually do for other people? Well, it strikes me that probably the biggest effect that it has is it gives people, when we make an assertive statement, it gives people, and indeed it gives the rest of the world, an opportunity to make a decision. In fact, it gives us an opportunity to make a decision. Having owned up to the fact that we are happy, for example, or excited, we can decide whether we are going to extend the experience or the moment. And indeed, people listening to us can help us to make that happen. So if we're saying, well, I'm really excited about this, the way this meeting's going, or I really like the way this conversation's going, then people will join us in extending it. They'll become enthusiastic. When we give somebody a piece of feedback, incidentally, which has a very similar, in our book, structure, the effect is, of course, is that we give people good feelings. Now, if it's something bad that's happening, if we are having a negative reaction and we are trying to tell the world or a collection of people or an individual that something is affecting us badly or negatively, then essentially what we're doing is giving them options. Option 1, which we might call path A, is to carry on. So the thing about being assertive is that we're not forcing ourselves on anybody, remember? We're not putting our feelings in front of somebody else's. We're putting our feelings out there, and we're allowing somebody else to make a decision about how they're going to react. Option B, of course, is for somebody to change their minds and stop what they're doing. Or indeed for a meeting, a collection of people, to stop what they're talking about or stop a course of action and then to pay attention to you. In fact, you're asking them to change their course of action just by asking them to be quiet with your particular view. So being assertive presents the world with an option. Do I carry on, or do I stop and pay attention? And indeed, then perhaps even change my behavior. The other bit, of course, is that we see that we've had an impact. And that's a strong encouragement to stay with it. If nothing else, to stay silent and to allow the other people in the room or the other person in the situation to respond, to make their next move. Now, often when I've worked with people over the years, they've come up with reasons for why being assertive was difficult for them. And so what I'd like to do now is to pick your brains about why would being assertive, and in this particular case as I'm intoning, why would talking about your feelings particularly challenge you? So I'm going to put up another poll here. So this poll is called, why wouldn't I talk about my feelings? Or why wouldn't I talk about feelings? Okay, so the options are, because my feelings are private, thanks very much indeed, they're my business. Or people can see how I feel, surely. What's the point? It's weak. Revealing our feelings reveals weakness. Or maybe you think it's unprofessional and that feelings belong at home. Or it's just not your thing. I don't really do feelings. Okay, and here are the results. So, wow, that's incredibly even. Surely people can see how I feel. It's weak to reveal feelings, and it's unprofessional. So I'm going to tackle all of those, and not far behind, actually. My feelings are private, they're my business, and not my thing. I don't really do feelings. Okay, a really interesting result for the middle three. Now, let me explain some of the thoughts that I have, and maybe I can get you to change your mind at some point in the future. Well, let's take the first one. First of all, feelings are private. They're nothing to do with anybody else, and yeah, they're my business. Well, the interesting thing is, of course, is that feelings aren't really private. This objection is based on the notion that we can hide our feelings. My experience, and yours probably too, is that actually we're very bad at hiding our feelings. We don't tend to be very successful at it at all. So we might not be choosing to talk about them, but we're almost certainly showing them, even if it's the absence of words and the absence of behavior. So that's that one. This one is actually it's unprofessional to talk about feelings. They belong at home. Well, for many years, people thought that feelings in the days of the stiff upper lip, yes, that certainly was the case. Actually, it's probably much more unprofessional to get caught in the shouting match. Then there's the showing weakness. Now, some people think that actually revealing themselves is dangerous, because other people, if we show them who we really are, if we show them that we're faulty or worried or fearful, that they will take advantage. But actually, my experience, and yours too probably, is that people who are really confident don't have to act big all the time. And then there's the people, surely people can see how I feel. Well, yes, they can, but nevertheless, we still need to explain, because people might not actually know what they're looking at. And it's likely that people will guess about us if we allow them to. So if you accept the premise that we actually we leak feelings, then we really need to explain ourselves. Okay. And finally, the I don't do feelings. Well, this is the tricky one. This is often something that people have grown up with, and with some thought and maybe some selective practice, we can actually give ourselves some practice at talking about our feelings. It's not a religion. It's not something we have to do all of the time, but actually sharing feelings, or being prepared to admit to them, even to ourselves initially, can be immensely helpful. We don't have to splurge them all over everybody all of the time. So hopefully you will have picked out some thoughts to add to your own about, what the possibilities are. But what I would say, whichever of those objections that you harbour the most strongly, actually taking the opportunity for small practice sort of offline where it doesn't really matter, like in a supermarket or with friends or at home, is a really good way into being assertive, trying things out in a safe environment. Okay. So before we go to the Q&A, there are a few things that we do habitually to weaken what we do, to weaken our assertive behavior. I just want to share 3 of them with you before Q&A time. The first one is that we tend to use qualifiers. Now, I've put this up as graffiti because I think this kind of talk, this kind of behavior really does spoil our language. It spoils the strength of our messaging. So words like slightly, a bit, I was a bit worried, I'm slightly annoyed, I was somewhat concerned, or in fact there's one there missing. I'm going to add right now, this is one of my least favorite words in the English language, the word concerned. Concerned really doesn't mean anything at all. Concerned is a sort of flim-flam, sort of patch up of a feeling for when we're generally trying to communicate that we're really unhappy or very unhappy, but actually don't want to nail the feeling. So those are my spoilers, the 3 weakeners. You will notice and spot yourself that when you start to use this kind of language, we also start to do it with our voice and with our choice of words around those words. And we'll also do it with our bodies. So language is a huge prompt to our whole psyche, if you will, to go either towards assertiveness or submissiveness or indeed aggression. And here's an interesting point that I haven't mentioned. We're most likely to come across as aggressive if we show angry behavior, thinking that we've managed to cover up our feeling. So the leaking, which can sometimes happen through the use of this language, actually makes things worse. So we're actually better off just saying how we feel and getting it out of the way and getting all the benefits that brings. The second things that people do is to use non-feelings. I feel you ought to. I feel that it's not the right thing to do. I feel it's important. That the illusion there is that the word feeling is enough to make everything after it a feeling. It's not. And lastly, this is a very common one, too many words. We tend to pile in words, even if we start well, we pile in words, often to soften the blow, often to repress the negative reaction that we expect from the other side. My thought for you is be brave. Cut down on the words. Just say what you need to say and stop. Okay, of course, sod's law, but that's all I have to say for you, to you. So it would be very interesting to hear your thoughts and questions right now. So, yeah, what are you thinking? Is this something you'd be prepared to try? Does this have I managed to change your mind, or indeed do you already freely talk about how you feel? Okay, I've got one here, and that is, what do I do if somebody who I'm talking to doesn't actually bother to pay attention to what I've said? What if they don't take me seriously? Well, that's a That's a good one. And there is a very specific thing that you can do. And that is that if somebody hasn't taken you seriously, is you can, rather than repeat, obviously there's this broken record technique, but rather than repeat, you actually then give them feedback on the fact that they've just ignored you. You know, I'm worried that you don't seem to have taken what I've just said seriously. So it's kind of tightening the screw a little bit. Okay, I'm going to take one more question, and then I'm going to put the rest of them into injury time, so to make sure that we end on time. Okay, a question here from Louise, and it's I do recognize feelings, and I could talk about them more. Yeah, great, well done. Kate A asked, what's the best way to respond if someone reacts badly, e.g. angrily or defensively, to being assertive with them? Well, the number one for me on that one, Kate, would be to listen, and to listen in a particular way, which is to actually point out that you've noticed how they feel, and this is how it would sound. It sounds like I've offended you. You sound annoyed by what I've just said. So we point out the feeling that we think they're having, and what we think that we did to cause that, and then pause. And that'll draw them out, Kate, and give them an opportunity to react more assertively. Okay, in the interest of ending on time, I'm going to just pause on questions there and come back to them in a moment. So I'll just quickly whiz through a summary for you. Okay, so final thoughts. Firstly, it's got to be brief. It's just so important, and I hope you've got that now, that if we're brief, we give people a chance to think. We give ourselves a chance to think. The second bit is to actually use a feeling. Try to remember to put that feeling in first. And thirdly is to pause. Sorry, I couldn't resist that one. Actually stopping to give people the chance to think and to appreciate the importance of the words that you've just said is vital. It'll add so much strength to what you have to say to the people with you, or even indeed sometimes just out loud to yourself. And before you go, I'm just going to run a final poll to see if there's any change in how you feel on the whole topic of assertiveness. So let's just quickly run that one before you dash off. Here we go. So where are you now? Will you just say how you feel now? Will you still let people notice and think for themselves? Will you drop hints still? Will you avoid offending people and still fester? Will you continue to keep your head down? Will you hint? How's that going? Where is this going? Okay, about half of you have voted. I think the voting pattern's very interesting. Wow, the votes are really coming in now. Okay, I'm going to close the poll there at 80%. Last chance. Okay, so here we go. This is where it ended up. Oh, well, that looks like success. Fantastic. I'm chuffed to bits. Again, thank you for coming to see us this morning, and I'm going to be running another webinar, the last one of this year, and hopefully you'll be able to make it. That'll be on Friday the 16th of December at 9:30 GMT as usual. If you're staying on, that's fantastic. I'll carry on in a moment. Okay, still got plenty of questions left, so let me go through them. Kate, I think it'll be a challenge to show my feelings more, but I will try it and see how it goes. Fantastic, great one. Holly V, is assertiveness something that will improve over time with practice? Holly, absolutely. And in fact, even if you're on your own, even talking to the mirror, but talking to your friends, your family, talking to the cat, if you have a cat, it will help, because it's getting comfort from people's reactions. And being assertive with strangers is a great way to do that. As much as anything, it's just exercising that emotional vocabulary, which will become more and more comfortable. Joe asks, what do you do if the other person does not respond and leaves you with your feelings but does not take it on board? Well, that's another repeat. Really, it's to say, look, it could be that they're not very comfortable with it. So my tendency would be to actually, I was going to say to give them feedback, but perhaps it's to actually pay them attention, to listen to them and say, you don't look comfortable, or you know, I'm not sure what's going on there. Have you heard what I said? So definitely to call them on it, but probably quite gently, because it's easy to assume that they don't care, whereas actually they just might not know what to do. So be generous. That's the bottom line for that one, Joe. Sally asks, how do you overcome issues with your team who don't feel comfortable sharing feelings? That's a really interesting one. Here's an exercise that I do often, particularly with executive teams or people who aren't getting on very well. What you can do is, as part of a team meeting, you could use a topic that's important to you, like, you know, where are we going next year, something strategic, and you get them to make a poster, stitch some pieces of A1 paper together, bring in some magazines from home, you know, paper, glue, scissors, and get them to make a collage, do some visioning, do some strategic visioning, and in that people will cut out faces and all sorts of imagery which actually shows how they feel, and then you can get them to talk about those images that they've used, and you will find, and they will find accidentally, that they're using emotion type language, and that's a good springboard to actually do it more often and to introduce it into team meetings. If you wanted to, and I would suggest it, you can even call it out and ask people what it was like at the end to talk it in those terms, and I think they'll find that it's a lot more comfortable than they imagine. So that would be a good shortcut, and it's probably spot on the right time of year to do that kind of strategic visioning for next year stuff. So that's what I do with that one, Sally. Mark, oh, hello. Gosh, I thought Mark was in New York. Well, if you're in New York, thank you for getting up so early. Paul, it's been a while since I attended. I feel great about it because it challenges me to try more. I have to give you my compliments and so on. And I'm just asked to run for another meeting. Have a great weekend. Oh, crikey! He's a busy boy if he's getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So thank you for that one, Mark. Here's one from Alex. I find it hard to talk about feelings in the workplace without the emotions kicking in too. How do I switch them off? If your emotions are still kicking in, even when you've talked about your feelings, it probably means, and what I'm guessing is that maybe you still get tearful, or your voice breaks up, or you still feel tension afterwards and anger. You're probably not actually naming the real feeling. You're maybe naming a proxy. So, for example, if I'm upset with somebody and I say, well, I'm not great, but I'm really upset, I will then leak the rest. It's as if our psyche is not satisfied by us telling a lie. It doesn't fool our brain. It's not settling enough. So if you still find that you're emotional when you think you've told the truth, it's probably because you haven't actually told the truth. Hopefully that works for you, Alex. Mark W. Interesting point, assertiveness and aggression. Witnessed this last night, the PM who thought he was being assertive, but so obvious he was aggressive. Great point. Thank you, Mark. Himavati, hello, Paul. How do I act with people who are always ready to bounce back with some answers to stop me talking? That's a really, really good question. You actually give them feedback, and it would sound like this. And of course, you have to put in your own words. So I'm just doing an example. How I feel, what about why? I'm frustrated, Peter, John, Prabhu, whatever, that you keep on answering me immediately, because it makes me think you're not taking me seriously. It's frustrating, keep on getting an answer from you, because it makes me think that you always think you're right. So give the person feedback. That's the one to do with that. That's what to do with that one. Himavati. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Apologies if I haven't. Mark W. That was another comment. Gary. He called me on. Paul, at the start, Gary says, Paul, at the start you said, I'm slightly loath to start. Oh dear, I've been caught out. Oh, I'm not as assertive as I thought I was. Good one, Gary. Thank you for that. Louisa H. How can you be assertive with someone who is very confident and assertive? I'm wondering if you think they are being assertive or whether they're actually being aggressive and they're making you feel small or diminished in some way. I suppose the first thing is to say how you feel. And I'll give you a specific example. I do quite a lot of public speaking. It very often is in front of people who know more than I do, almost always. Or I'm running a difficult session and I don't know how it's going to turn out. And I find that if I'm really starting to be gripped by my nerves, as you are maybe being gripped by the nerves that you're creating in yourself because this person is so formidable, then to actually admit how you're feeling will really let you off the hook. It'll do that brain trick with the little man inside pulling the levers, switching off the amygdala and getting the prefrontal cortex, the right prefrontal cortex going in your favor. So saying, look, I find you really formidable. I have huge respect for you, and I sometimes find myself getting nervous trying to explain ideas to you. And put your own words on it, and that's what I would do. Give the person some feedback. Look, I get intimidated when I'm with you, or I find myself amazingly getting shy when I'm with you because I have huge respect for you. Find a reason to tell them the truth, and it'll really let you off the hook. Not just because of the brain trick you've done on yourself, but also you'll be giving them feedback, and their demeanor will change as well. I'm sure of it. Give it a try. Okay, that was Louisa's. Roxanne, I've always been quite open with my thoughts and feelings, and I do believe that they get results. People know what you feel. If people know what you feel, they can react accordingly, and you both know where you stand. It's always had a more positive outcome than a negative one, and I appreciate people letting me know that, how they feel. Then I know and can act or react accordingly. Thank you for the session. Oh, great. I'll share it with my team. Brilliant. Thanks, Roxanne. Roger Irish, not a question, but I plan to try it out on a call later today. Fantastic, Roger. Do you think this is, Charlotte M asks, do you think this is more difficult for some cultures to practice than others? Yes. I'm thinking primarily people from the Far East, the Indian subcontinent, the entire African continent, and parts of the United States. Definitely. I've worked with people from all over the world, and certainly there is a great deal of culturally ingrained reticence to talk to the truth, particularly, we'll talk about feelings, but what overlays that more than anything is rank. Rank as defined by age or a hierarchical, on the org chart rank. But I think sort of millennials. So if you are, 30 something, and certainly below 30, and you're on this webinar, it's probably starting to change for you because you are rather more internationalized culturally than before because of social media, because of this kind of thing. But certainly, there is a difference in cultures. Although the feedback that I've had over the years is that it does not preclude people from doing this, and it's not culturally incorrect or offensive in any of those places that I've mentioned, or any of those continents that I've mentioned. It's just that it might take a lot more practice, personal practice, to actually become comfortable with it. And maybe it'll never be completely comfortable, even when it's being effective. Thank you for that one, Charlotte. Karen C. I show my feelings and say how I feel, but can you do this too much? Yes, you can. You can do it too much. So having got the trick of it, Karen, you need to decide which things are really worth your while talking about. But you'd have to go quite a long way. But again, you know, too much of anything is bad, and assertiveness and talking about our feelings is no different. And in fact, if you think about my definition of assertiveness, talking about your feelings all the time is actually almost rather aggressive, isn't it? Because you're putting your stuff on the other person all of the time. I'm not saying that that's what you do, but given your question, if you think you might, then ask yourself, I'm not saying stop talking about your feelings, but ask yourself, is this one as important as the one they're having? Or is it as important as the moment? Maybe not. I'll leave it. Okay. Julie, I'm not sure I always know how I'm feeling. Any ways for trying to pin it down? Really good question, Julie. This one is certainly about pausing and noticing, and maybe you're going to have to do more of it. But take your time. We are so clever. Your brain is so beautifully fashioned that even a couple of seconds will allow you to figure out how you're feeling. Listen out for or pay attention to bodily sensations. What are your hands doing? What are your shoulders and neck doing? The coloration. Do you feel hot or cold? Pay attention to it, and the little signals you'll soon learn to magnify. You'll have to practice though. But give yourself a few moments and ask yourself some questions. If you want, I have a sheet of feelings that I devised, interesting, when I was working with a company that was spread across the US, Europe, and the Far East. And we put together a calibration sheet of feelings for people, so that the guys and girls in the US could understand the guys and girls in the Far East and Hong Kong and in the Netherlands. So if you'd like that sheet, drop us an email, pf@paulfurey.com, and I'll send you that sheet, Julie. And you could have that as a little aid memoir. You can just glance down at, or have it in your pocket, or print out a little version of it. So that's another thing you could do. Okay, getting through questions here. Just now going down to see if there are any more questions. Yep, quite a few. Daryl G. As a younger member of our board of directors, I am often looked at as the one who will let feeling affect a decision. So being confident in my decisions is critical, as the MD and older members are very set in their ways that feelings are not professional. So I will have to deliver this to them to show the difference, to show the differences. Interesting, very, very interesting. And I suppose the thing there, Daryl, is about, for you in particular, is about talking about your feelings before you show them and explaining them. So talking about feelings isn't talking about feelings and them, you know, why they're important, but it's actually introducing them. It's actually explaining part of our reasoning. Now, there is not a woman or man sitting on your board who does not have feelings. The difference between you and some of them is that they're actually not honest enough to admit it. They're not admitting what part of their feelings are going in with the logic, the other type of logic, to form the decision. And for me, the logic is, if we don't acknowledge feelings, it's a bit like pretending that a certain part of the data that we're using to make a decision doesn't exist. It's like saying the P&L account doesn't exist, but we're going to expand. That's exactly the same as feelings. But feelings have had a bad rap over the years because people who become emotional outwardly, of course, aren't thinking straight. The irony is that the more often we explain, the more skillful we become at explaining feelings, the less likely we are to flip out, and the more likely we are to be rational under pressure. People who learn to express their feelings in speech are the ones who stay rational under pressure. And I'm just scrolling down. I hope that does it for you, Daryl. I'm just scrolling down to see if there's anything else. Nope, that looks like it's it. Thank you so much for joining and for staying on for all this time. Gosh, that's a record. And have a fantastic weekend, and see you in December. Don't forget to write if you have another question or you need some help from us. All the best. Bye for now.